Hey everybody, Coach here. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Today's topic of discussion is going to be about landscape drainage, one of the big three in any landscape project and extremely important. Hey, join me. I'm coming from a place that you didn't think you'd probably find me, but we have enjoyed it immensely in the first hour of our tour, and that is the Tucson, Arizona Botanical Gardens. Hey, hope you like the scenery here, and we'll get into it. Stay with me, and I will be right back. You know, if you talk to almost any landscape contractor worth the salt and general contractors, you'll find that water in itself is probably the most destructive force, not only on the landscape, but also the dwelling itself. Between mismanaged, poor graded, no gutters, weak foundations, low spots in the front and backyards, water can do some of the worst damage and cause a lot of insurance claims because it is not managed properly on the people's property on which it falls. So today what we're talking about is 4 different kinds of drainage systems and how you can be back in control of the water on your landscape. So hey, I'm Matt. You can call me Coach. I appreciate you being here. You know, every week I bring you tips and tricks in the landscape and design concepts, which is tailor-made for the DIY homeowner in you. Also, to have the ability to be able to get the professional results you want, have a lot more self-reliance within your own home, and be able to save a ton of money. You know, in my first home, I was taught a rapid lesson in water control and diversion in order to save my home's foundation and prevent a very large insurance claim and all that accompanies that kind of a nightmare. You know, back then I lived in Hayward, California at the time. The first winter had an above average rainfall amount, especially in the first half of the winter season. Where my home was located, I had a lot of hilly area and other properties above me. And after a few heavy rains and the runoff accompanying from those rains, I found a moderate amount of migrating on the surface water and subsurface water that was trespassing across my backyard. Like I said, above and below ground, and it ran right into the back or upper wall and stem walls of my home's foundation. You know, at first I thought nothing of it until I went to my garage about 2 weeks later and found a small trickle of water weeping into my garage. Week after wet week, the trickle became a constant stream that seeped out of weep holes in the garage back wall. It got so bad after about a month that it was literally fine sediments and mud became an ever-present mess where I had to park the car in the garage. You know, I did some source investigation and I found numerous gopher holes about 2 to 4 inches down underneath the ground that was at the back wall of my foundation. And it had literally built trickles or creeklets that allowed water to freely flow where it wanted and eventually down the foundation wall and out the weep holes in the garage. You know, at the time, I knew that weep holes would probably take care of the matter, but I do not think that any builder ever designed that back foundation wall in order to have that much sediments and mud coming into someone's garage. I knew I had to correct the water problem, and I had to do it pretty quickly. Although the house had been there for about 30 years when I bought it, I did not want to take any chances with water pressures building up behind the back foundation wall and the eventual problems turning into a calamity. You know, a little more investigation found other homes on the same block suffered some of the same issues. Some a little worse, some a little less. Some in the garage and others having seepage under their foundation on the uphill side and leak out on the downhill side. You know, for me, that was a giant yikes. So I put my limited landscape knowledge at the time that I had accumulated from school and valuable retail nursery job that I had had recently, that eventually taught me almost everything I know today. And for that, I thank my mentors at Navale's Nursery in Fremont, California. And at that time, I began planning out a solution. After about 2 weeks of working at night to earn a living, taking care of a 9-month-old daughter during the daytime, and then trenching around the entire rear and sides of my home to a depth of about 14 inches, I installed a curtain drain. A curtain drain system using perforated corrugated drain line, geotextile sediment sock, backfilling the trenches with 3/4 inch drain rock, followed by 1.5 inch drain rock above ground on the lower, almost street side of the house. And I gathered all the downspouts and allowed the surface and subsurface water problem to be corralled into these drainage system and the French drain. The water was controlled and redirected around both sides of the house and down to a safe exit point near the street. You know, guys, from that point on, and that was I'm not going to lie to you, that was a bear of a project because the ground was, yeah, it was kind of sloppy. And in some places it wasn't very easy to dig in. I actually had a digging bar and a pick to get through some parts of the sandstone. But you know, from that point on, I slept a lot easier and I never had trickles of water in the garage ever again. I watched on several occasions when I had a good storm roll through, and I mean a good storm, at least for Northern California standards, the amount of water that literally shot out of that 3-inch drain line and traveled through and was slowed by the 1.5 inch drain rock on both sides of the house was freaking amazing. I was very satisfied with the project, and it went in conjunction with kind of a total landscape makeover at the time. Funny though, you know, all that work and all the trenching and mess that I made in order to accomplish that, not one neighbor, not one in the whole neighborhood ever walked by or stopped to look or see what I was doing. And when I was completing the project, I just kind of thought, man, you'd think someone would say, hey, is it working? You know, or something along those lines. But not one of them ever inquired what I was doing or what I had accomplished. Landscape drainage has to be one of the top 3 landscape tasks that any DIY homeowner should address when taking on new or a new existing home, especially if there's signs of problems, especially in areas where more flat land is found and gravity slope does not allow drainage very easy. You know, in properties like this, ponding occurs and water sits and seeps along foundations, especially if you don't have gutters and it drops right at the eaves there. And it can cause minor to major flooding in some types of landscapes. I'll share with you a little story. I had a job back in the early 2000s where I was hired to correct such a problem. It was in one of our more affluent neighborhoods in Northern California. The drainage issue at this guy's house was so bad that the customer literally in weeks previous had gone out and bought a lot of sand and a lot of bags and sandbagged his back patio slider because water had come to within 1 inch of coming through and into the family room. I will tell you about a very successful solution later on in one of the segments of this video. It worked like a charm, but it took a lot of careful digging, a lot of careful sloping and measuring, and a mechanical installation to rid the water from the backyard once and for all. Now, for those of you who live in hilly areas of the country or world, count yourself somewhat lucky. Gravity can work for you and make drainage systems virtually effortless. But is your soil easily excavated on those hilly slopes? Some are, and some certainly are not. For us flatlanders, where I worked, we had to be very precise with slope to attain water flow and that allowed water and actual evacuation off of the property. Proper estimation of slope was key, and careful trenching depth was absolutely critical. So we did a lot of laser leveling and string leveling with bubble levels and that kind of stuff, and it always worked out pretty darn well. So let's take a minute and talk about system number one, and that is your solid pipe gravity drain that most everybody has heard and seen of on residential applications. Take a look at these. I'll start off with talking about solid pipe type of systems. These are predominantly the most common systems that are installed in most residential developments across the country, where in some cases code is required to have these things, and responsible home ownership requires them in new homes if you don't even have code. They usually are constructed using a 3-inch corrugated solid drain line attached to the downspouts, with maybe a couple of catch basins attached to the system at various low points in the backyard. The drain lines are most often very shallow in and around the home, and then deepen as the line travels towards the street or the termination area, for obvious reasons of slope. The corrugated drain line is ribbed. It's a lightweight ABS plastic. It's ribbed and can stand up to be buried under several inches of soil pressure, and even under concrete slabs and stuff, as long as you have some soil cover over them. And sometimes even feet deep, depending on the type of soil you have, without crushing it at all. You can also use solid line PVC drain line, which is assembled just like an irrigation PVC pipe, with couplings and L's and T's, and attached with similar downspout adapters. Gravity here plays the same role in these systems, and are restricted to mostly straight lines, 45-degree angles, and 90-degree turns, because it just doesn't have any flexibility except at the couplings themselves. In contrast to that corrugated drain line I mentioned, that stuff, you can almost double it back on itself and it'll still work. And it's very flexible as far as making turns and flexing up to downspouts and stuff. It's very easy to work with, and it's very easy if you roll it out 100% before you try and play with it. If it's all coiled up, yeah, it makes it a little harder. But sometimes maybe you only need the little 10-foot lengths that are available as a repair job, or if you don't have a long ways to go, maybe you just need 3 or 4 10-foot segments that they sell in the box stores and other places, and you can just connect it up that way. Now, as far as connection points, when you have couplings or you're going one length of pipe to another, I usually always used couplings and then used Gorilla tape, not duct tape. I really like the Gorilla tape, and I would do a very solid wrapping of the Gorilla tape on both sides of the couplings, and it would hold forever and ever, as long as you didn't have a lot of water that you were dealing with at the time. So solid drain lines, getting in, for the sake of this video length, getting into the slope and stuff, just try to attain a slope that is 1/8 of an inch per foot. So if you had a 40-foot run somewhere, try to drop it 5 inches. That's pretty easy math. That's about as easy as I can tell you. And I'll tell you what, in some places of the Central Valley when I worked, it was everything I could do to get that. One little technique I might share with you is create a little bit of hydraulic pressure by running that drain line, cut off the downspout tail at the bottom, and run your drain line up like 12 inches up onto the downspout itself. And then you'll create a little bit of water pressure if you can barely attain that 1/8 inch per foot. Just a little trick there. So our second style of drain, we're going to talk about how to control water, both runoff water and also subsurface water. And that is going to be your French or curtain drain. Let's take a look at those now. These drains, as I alluded to earlier at my first home and that project that I did in that affluent neighborhood, are created specifically for capturing and moving unwanted water from surface runoff and subsurface runoff. A trench of various depths is created to match the amount, I guess is the best word, match the amount of anticipated migrating water. The more anticipated problem water, the wider and deeper the trench system should be. In most cases, a trench of, like 6 inches wide and 12 inches deep is more than enough. Just remember, when you do have a trench that deep, you have to be able to use it so that water is still going to flow, or it's absolutely useless. I've installed many trenches about that size, but I've also installed systems where the trench was 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide to accommodate large runoff problems. In almost all cases, these trenches prevent water from traveling any further. Water on the surface is captured by the trench, and subsurface water, basically water just can't jump this trench. Gravity will take it into the French drain. Water flows into the trench on the surface and underground. It's captured by a perforated corrugated pipe or a perforated PVC style of pipe, transferred to the location where it can be safely evacuated away from the dwelling or property that is in need of protection. Or you can take it and connect it up to your solid surface or solid pipe that I just got through mentioning, and have the whole system drain out a particular location. I always suggest that if there is a question of what size pipe to use, because you sometimes get one hell of a lot of rain all at once, but maybe that's not the norm, then always go one size larger. If you have 3-inch pipe, go to 4-inch pipe just in case. If you have 4-inch pipe, go to 6-inch pipe just in case. Remember, the trenches will have to be a little bit larger to accommodate the larger size of pipe. Always remember sediment socks, no matter what. Write it on your forehead or whatever. Always remember sediment socks or sleeves when installing curtain drains over your piping. They are absolutely paramount to prevent the fine soil sediments and sandies and buggies from infiltrating the corrugated manufactured holes and rendering the pipe full of dirt and practically useless after a season or two. The system I installed at my old home, Weed Patch Ranch, which was an absolute game changer, was installed with sediment sock, and the trench was lined with a landscape fabric that was my very first layer. Then I put in the pipe that was wrapped in the sediment sock, and then I placed 3/4 inch gravel over that, much like my first house. Hasn't changed that much. And then I would take and gravel up to the top of the trench itself, and then I would take that landscape fabric and I would literally burrito the whole trench with gravel, pipe, etc., with landscape fabric, and then I graveled over the top of the fabric itself. I then graveled in and around the trench and kind of naturalized the area with large cobbles and small perennials and some small shrubbery. In one case in the backyard, I actually had a deck that was over the French drain, but no trees. I did not put any trees anywhere near the pipe itself because I did not want any roots infiltrating that area and causing problems. So, French drain, a very useful way of controlling water that is not necessarily coming off your house. You can do French drains if you choose not to have gutters and you put a wider, probably 2-foot trench underneath your eaves and then use a French drain to evacuate the water there. You can use that application, but man, it's so much easier just to put gutters, unless you have a style of house that just doesn't allow gutters. Okay, so our third style of drain is one that you don't see very often except in very porous soils, and that is your pit drains. Let's take a look at those now and see how they're constructed. All right, so 2 down. Let's talk about another one. And this one basically is only going to work with sandy or sandy loam type of soils. You really have to have excellent percolation. If you're lucky to have that sandy soil or sandy loam soil, pit drains can work really well, provided you don't have real serious rain events often. Pit drains can be overwhelmed in serious rain events, but planned correctly, I use plan I don't know how many times a year. I wish I had $100 for every time I use the word plan. But planned correctly, you can use overflow piping installed so excess water can evacuate away to a safe area, even if the pit drain gets overwhelmed. My experience with pit drains always had them placed quite a ways away from the dwelling. I usually used large 3-foot diameter auger bits with extensions, maybe 1, maybe even 2 extensions on my Bobcat to drill holes several feet deep. I even had one time where I had a backhoe brought in and we dug 2 pit drains that were 15 feet deep. Tells you how porous the soil was in the area that I was working. Then I would line the pit bottom with a landscape fabric, probably 2 or 3 layers, to prevent any of the drain rock from settling in and hardening the soil in there. I would have then large river stone or very large drain rock for my very bottom layer for the first 12 to 16 inches or so, and then 1.5 inch drain rock all the way up to within about 12 inches of the top of the pit. Then I brought in the emergency overflow piping and trenched it off either to another pit or to an area that if it overflowed out there, it was no big deal. I brought the piping to the pit for the actual pit drain and extended it about 8 to 12 inches into the drain itself. And it worked really well. And the reason we put it on there is because the customer really wanted a solution to keep water on the property, let it perk down into the ground, and eventually it would hit his well and you would be able to use it all over again. Then I would install that emergency overflow like I told you about, and all was good. When I got it all done, I would generally put like 12 to 18 inches of topsoil over the top of the pit drain, on top of other landscape fabric layers, obviously. And then I would turf over the top of it or have a decorative area with decorative gravel and maybe a bird bath or yard decoration or something like that where the customer knew where the pit drain was after months and years of living there. So pit drains. Our fourth and final type of drainage system that we're going to talk about today is a mechanized drain system. And when I speak about mechanized, you're actually using at least 3 out of the 4 types of draining systems that we've already discussed. We've talked about the gravity drain, French air curtain drain. Now we're going to use the sump drains. And this is where we bring it all together in places that needs water lifted off of a piece of property because of no slope and no drainage. Take a look. These are what saved my bacon at Weed Patch Ranch. I had relatively flat conditions except at the back of the house. The fall from the backyard to the street was about 3 feet, but there was about 1.5 to almost 2 feet of a hump. And it took over 300 feet to get to the street culvert. So I couldn't just do if I had done just a regular gravity drain with some catch basins, I would have had to have dug 4 feet down in order to get enough pitch and slope for water to actually flow. And that was just ludicrous. That was not going to work. I decided to install 2 sump drains instead. I directed water to them from a much shorter distance using my solid system and also French drain systems. Then once into the sump vault, they would get pumped 160 feet and 320 feet away to the street culvert and safely evacuated. Inside the sump hole or the pit, I installed a large ABS vault liner, which is basically a pre-made plastic vault with some cut-off areas that you can saw off and then bring in your corrugated pipe. From that point on, I used expandable foam and duct tape, which worked really well, and then backfilled the trenches as needed. And inside the vault itself, that is where I placed a 2 horsepower electric sump pump. Usually a Little Giant or Zern brand, although I'm not endorsed or sponsored by them. That's what I used, and I found that they worked very, very reliably and well, and used them in a lot of my contracting projects as well. And then I attached like a 2-inch PVC discharge pipe, some check valves near the pump itself, and some unions in case I needed to maintain and take the pump out. The 2-inch pipe was, I didn't care how deep it was. It only went down about 12 inches, maybe 14 at the most, and then it daylighted right there at the street. And that was on the 320-foot side. Now, over on the other side, the 160-foot side, that's where I did a little green draining. And I daylighted that pipe about, I'd say 90 feet or so away from the street culvert. And I created a dry stream bed that I decorated with river cobble and boulders and stuff. And then when we did have rain events and the sump actually kicked on and started pumping, water would flow down this now wet creek bed, and some of it would percolate back into the ground and stay on my property, and excess would safely go down the creek bed and down a little cascade right near the fence and into the street culvert. It looked kind of neat when it was really running. Honestly, the system created one of the quickest drying yards in my entire neighborhood. There was folks that still had standing water for days and days that lived a house or two away from me, and Weed Patch, it was doing okay. I mean, you could drive around, except back in the olive orchard, but I really didn't care about that area. That wasn't a domestic part of the house, and the orchard could always use the water. So there you go. That was the sump system, and it's good as long as you have power. A sump system is absolutely worthless if you have no power at the time. So if you have a very reliable electrical grid and you know that very seldom ever does it ever go down, even in the worst of storms, then sump systems are fantastic. I had such an electrical grid. The times that we lost power, it wasn't raining. It was because somebody smacked a pole out on the main road and knocked out the power for a little while. All right, hey, I've got another one for you. I'm going to just do a bonus for you. And this one is one that is on the horizon, not only in some of the drier parts of my country, the USA, but also around the world. And that bonus segment that I'm going to give you is rain harvesting systems. You know, although gaining popularity, it is still the smallest percentage of all the drain systems installed today. Where we were when I was filming some of this at the Tucson Botanical Gardens, over 80% of the water that they use for irrigation purposes only is captured from rainwater harvesting, and they use it throughout the drier months. And their drier months are the winter and spring and fall. Oftentimes in the summertime, they have a large amount of water that comes through. When I say a large amount of water that they get, it's through the summer monsoon rains that they get, although that has become recently kind of an unpredictable amount of rain throughout the summertime. But they do it, and take a look at this sign if you're interested in it. And you can also Google it. YouTube has some fantastic rain harvesting ideas that you can learn about. And my favorite company, Aquascape, out of St. Charles, Illinois, they have fantastic rainwater harvesting systems that you can assemble and put together. You know, in the more water-threatened areas of the country and world, these systems safely capture water, usually from runoff, whether it be off of dwellings, sheds, garages, even man-made lean-tos that you can create. And it'll capture water in any form, and then you store it either underground or above ground. There are underground storage systems that employ the use of underlayment, rubber liners, matrix boxes, and plumbing, and you can even decorate the top of them with like permeable paver patios and also water features, pondless waterfalls that can be constructed, and the water that is stored in the underground cistern area can be pumped up and used in a recirculating closed water system, and then you can pump it out with another pump and use it for drip irrigation in and around your landscape. The other systems involve above ground tanks as storage and either use sumps to fill or in many cases gravity fed water is plumbed into the storage tanks from a much higher area, like off of a tall roof line or a tall shed. Then water is used as needed via shutoff valves, pumps, irrigation valves, etc. I did one of my last large jobs. We actually created a man-made creek where there was a drainage swale on my customer's property, and then we created even a small dam, and then at the base of that dam we put in a sump vault, and then the pump would pump water into two 10,000-gallon storage tanks, and out of those storage tanks and captured after a winter, we had a 5 horsepower gas pump that pumped water out into a 40 sprinkler system that was for fire suppression. Imagine that, fire suppression in California. There's 4 drainage systems plus the bonus of the rain harvesting to best control your runoff situation. Ladies and gents, I implore you not to skimp on this area of your landscape project. It can allow you to sleep at night when Mother Nature decides to open up the heavens bad. Maintenance is also a key. Gutters should remain as debris-free as possible. Downspout screens should always be placed in the downspout areas to prevent leaves and larger debris from entering the system. You know what I did when I installed them is I usually installed the occasional Y coupling for the 3-inch and 4-inch corrugated, and a couple times for the solid PVC. It's a great way and a very inexpensive way to access the underground system for flush out. And in some real serious cases where a plumber can come in and rotor-rooter it out if necessary. You know, you put a cap on that Y and it's probably just right at ground level, so it's not very obtrusive, you know, and you put a cap on it and then nothing can get in there, but it's super simple to unscrew it or pop it off and put a garden hose down in there and rinse it out really good before the winter comes. If you decide to put in a sump system, rinse out those sump vaults at least 2 times a year, especially if you're in a dirty, dusty environment where wind is present. You'd be surprised how much dust washes off your roof and down into your underground system. So one of the main reasons we were really drawn here to Tucson Botanical Garden is about the system they have installed for drainage here at the gardens themselves. They have not only solid core piping, but they also have French drains. They also have rain capture, which over 80% of all the water that is put back onto this 5-acre botanical garden is harvested from rain, and very little city water is used. So I thought this would be like a perfect backdrop to at least to be able to narrate portions or all of this particular episode. Is these guys got it dialed down, and not do they need a whole bunch of water to water a lot of the stuff here at the botanical gardens, because a lot of it is natural rainfall, so they don't use a whole bunch, especially like in the cactus garden. But you know, their water bill for 5 acres has got to be bare minimum. You know, they have potable waters for bathrooms and stuff like that. And when they don't have enough rainwater capture, then obviously they're going to have to switch over to a potable system. But dang, drainage, roof water runoff, a gathering, underground cisterns, water pumps, and drip systems. That's their whole mechanized water capture and repurpose system that they have here on the property. And I thought that was kind of neat. Yeah, it's probably a fancy, expensive one, but you can scale that down and use it at your residential application with just a a vegetable garden, a 500-gallon rain capture off your garage, and a little 12-volt pump, and you'd be able to run a drip system like that. So anyway, I thought it would be interesting, and I hope you like some of the B-roll footage that we have shot here for you, because this is a pretty special place. If you ever get in the Tucson area, you know, spend a couple of dollars and a few hours and walk through here and see what they've done. I wish I could be here probably in May, although it's starting to get kind of hot here in May, but everything that is in bloom. And they have such transitory migrating butterflies and moths, hummingbirds, and a whole bunch of color at that time of year. Hey, I'm glad you joined me here today. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen and what you've heard. Hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, would you? And share it maybe with a friend. Drop me a comment below where I can answer it. Or at the end of every video, I have an email that you can personally email me with a landscape question, and I will get back to you. Anyway, hey, I'm Matt. You can call me Coach. Thanks for joining me. I hope your holiday season is going well, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.